Hello, Foreign Entanglements viewers. We are back today. I'm here with David Brockington, David, can you introduce yourself and your affiliation?
Yeah, my name is Dr. David Brockington. I'm at Plymouth University in the Department of Politics and International Relations.
Right. And although you are an American, you have become deeply embedded, integrated, and interested in British politics. And so today we're going to talk about the election that happened on Thursday our time, anyway. So my first, I think, standard question is, what the fuck happened?
I don't know. To put it bluntly, I still haven't worked it out.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of theories going around, and a lot of those theories are being peddled or interpreted through pre-existing ideological prisms in ways that makes people feel comfortable. But we don't have a lot of hard evidence. There's a lot of discussion that it's the youth vote that did it, but there's no hard evidence to demonstrate that youth turnout was up the explosive ways that some people are purporting. But the takeaway is, in a country that for the last generation or two has awkwardly had to deal with multipartism, what we've seen, at least in England and Wales, is a dramatic return to a two-party state. And you can see that in most every constituency. Both parties gained votes. And an excellent example of this would be the Liberal Democrats. They actually lost, I believe it's 0.5% of the vote from 2 years ago. So they're down to 7%, Todd. But they gained 3 or 4 seats. They're up to 12 seats now. So there's clear evidence that there's been a lot more tactical voting going on than the last generation of British elections would predict. And Theresa May ran an absolutely dreadful campaign. She was ill-equipped for it, and they adopted a strategy which she didn't want to follow through on, and that made it even worse.
All right, so, first things first, when we say that we're returning to a two-party system, so the major losers here, the Lib Dems lost percentage vote, but they picked up seats. The UKIP, to my understanding, got crushed, and the SNP, if not crushed, the SNP suffered in Scotland. Is that my understanding? Is that an accurate understanding of what's going on?
UKIP got hammered. They had about 13% of the vote in 2015, and they were down to 1.5% this time. The Liberal Democrats lost some vote share. And what you have to remember about the Liberal Democrats is they would habitually get between 24% of the vote in any general election. And they were the junior coalition partner in the first Cameron government from 2010 to 2015. That didn't do so well for them, and they plummeted down to 8 seats in 2015, and they lost vote share. They lost for their little bit. They lost a significant amount of vote share, but actually picked up seats, which is evidence of tactical voting. The Scottish Nationalists lost significantly, and they lost 20-odd seats in Scotland as well. So I'm not going to say that they're done because they still have over 30 of Scotland's 56 seats. But they peaked in 2015 as well.
So the Lib Dem strategy, and I guess this is sort of my next question, which is, you said there's little hard evidence right now to be able to interpret what happened on Thursday. How much evidence is going to develop about, how much are we going to be able to learn, and you're a political science, so you have a grasp on this data. How much are we going to be able to learn about sort of what turnout was like, whether there was this youth explosion, and so forth? And I'm particularly interested in here in what is your sense and what is kind of the availability that we'll have in the future of how. Because I know the Lib Dems wanted to push their opposition to Brexit very hard, right? And so, they may have gained seats, but they lost percentage. So how did opposition to Brexit break down? Because I've seen a couple of different accounts of what Brexit meant for this election.
Well, getting back to your first question, within a day or two or three, one of the major polling firms, I believe it's Ipsos Mori, but I could almost certainly have that wrong, are going to release a poll that will suggest how turnout broke down by age cohort. And one of the things we have to understand about British elections is, we can point to 2015 or 2010 and said the 18 to 24s turned out from, at 44%, whereas the over 65s turned out at 120% or whatever. That's all based on survey research. And so that is, it's not hard evidence, it's solid evidence, but it's still not, it's not a complete enumeration. The Liberal Democrats, I thought, played a good strategy at the beginning of this. Being the only party coming out in favor of a second referendum on accepting the terms of any Brexit agreement, and sticking their necks out and distinguishing themselves. Because remember, 48% of the electorate voted to remain, and nobody was queuing up to try to capture that vote. And if you look at by-elections for local council and by-elections for parliamentary seats, since the referendum, the Liberal Democrats were batting nearly 1,000. They were winning everything. They'd only lost like 2 seats out of 100-odd by-elections or something like that. And so there were reasons to suspect, based on a combination of their strategy and empirical performance, that the Liberal Democrats would get back to, get close to where they were. And that didn't work. That didn't work at all, which is one of the surprises from this, and one of the things that we're going to have to try to examine to understand with greater certainty.
Right. All right. So, and I guess we will revisit this question. But okay, so we know what happened on Thursday-ish. What exactly is going on right now? So, what is the status of the UK government, and what is the coalition going to look like? Who are the partners or silent partners? And so what's going on next?
Well, by tradition in British politics, the largest party in Parliament gets to ask the Queen to have a crack at forming a government. And that's what Theresa May has done. And so technically Theresa May is still the Prime Minister, but we're in that weird, ambiguous period where they're not formally the government yet. They're not going to have a formal coalition partner, so it's not going to be a repeat of 2010 when David Cameron didn't quite get a majority. He had to turn to the Liberal Democrats, and they formed this robust coalition. Nobody is lining up to make that deal with Theresa May. What it sounds like they're going to do is rely on the 10 members of Parliament from Northern Ireland who are affiliated with the DUP, the Democratic Unionist Party. And use that on what the British call a confidence in supply basis. And basically what that means is that in any vote in Parliament that requires or that hints at a vote of no confidence, the DUP will support the Conservatives. And so who's going to be our Prime Minister? The DUP, the 10 DUP MPs will support the Conservatives, and that will get them over a majority, just barely, by like 3 votes. Supply issues are dealing with taxing and spending. So the budget. Any other issue before Parliament, the DUP is free to vote as they want. And that's where things stand now, and that's the only thing we've heard might be going forward. So that's almost certainly how it's going to be. Now, the question is, how fragile is this arrangement going to be? And that's the big unanswerable.
Right. So, let's start asking that question then, right? So, I guess in terms of all things fragile, so even if this sort of jerry-rigged situation works out and the DUP manages to hold with on confidence and supply, how fragile is Theresa May's position right now? And maybe if you could also comment too, and I have just sort of read a little bit about this, and so I don't know how consequential it is, about the Scottish Tories, about whether there is any concern about the Scottish Tories and breaking away or causing problems for this coalition.
Getting on the first one, Theresa May's position is probably a lot more solid than what was being reported on Friday. The conventional wisdom right now is twofold. One, the Conservative Party do not want to have another leadership election. So they don't want to get rid of her, which is very unlike the Conservative Party, because in all of Western democracies, the Conservative Party in the United Kingdom is probably the best at winning elections. This is the party that basically sacked Margaret Thatcher. And she was their most successful prime minister for, well, even now. She's probably going to be able to hang on for an indeterminate amount of future. The next question is, what is the future of this minority government? The common comparison drawn is 1974, and it's interesting because the night before the election, me and some of my friends in the local party that I work for here, after a bunch of meetings and such, went down to the pub and had a couple pints. And the head of the Labour Party group here in Plymouth told me, I expect it's going to be a minority Conservative government, and if that's the case, we'll have another election in the autumn. Now, what he was pointing to is 1974. In 1974, the British had an election in February, and what was a big surprise was that the Labour Party became the largest single party, but they only had a minority government under Harold Wilson. And what Harold Wilson did was just enough things to go back to the electorate in November and say, okay, let's give us a majority, and he barely got a majority. The problem is right now the Conservative Party has absolutely no appetite for another election because they saw the trajectory of the two parties over the course of this election, and the Conservatives are convinced that they would lose a further general election. Now, maybe they won't feel that way, come October or November, but right now that's what their position is, and so they're just going to try to hold on as best they can.
And the Scots, are the Scots relevant in this, the Scottish Tories?
The Scots are relevant in two ways. One, they've essentially propped up the Conservatives. Now, without the 10-odd Scottish Conservative MPs, the Conservative Party would still be the largest party, but they add a little bit more heft. And the problem that this introduces is for those not familiar with Northern Irish politics, well, you're lucky. It's easier that way. The DUP are on the far right of the Unionist and Loyalist communities in Northern Ireland. Some of their positions would be right at home with the hard right of the Republican Party back in the United States, especially in terms of social policy. The leader of the Scottish Conservatives, she's a gay woman who's about to marry her partner. The DUP are virulently opposed to civil rights of that nature, or, well, it could be argued civil rights of almost any nature. And so the Scottish Conservatives are concerned that this might presage, either by choice or by necessity, of a shift to the right by the mainstream British Conservatives on social issues, and she simply will not allow that.
Right. Although, but if this sort of soft coalition holds with respect to just sort of, as you said, the confidence in the supply, are they hoping to sidestep a lot of those questions then? Right. I mean, a lot of the social issue, to the extent that there's legislation, they would be able to find Labour or Lib Dem support for anything like this, that they wouldn't need the DUP.
Exactly. That's the hope. However, it's also in the interest of the Labour Party not to vote with the government on anything. Right. Because the Labour Party is in their interests to have a vote of no confidence in the Conservatives and force another election sooner rather than later.
Right. So, I mean, you're a member, or you work with the Labour Party. We should say that outright. So, what does this election presage for the future of Labour? Obviously, it's extremely complicated given what people anticipated a month and a half ago, which was that this was effectively going to be the end of Corbynism, and that seems to be utterly wrong. And I'm interested in also your perspective, because you've gone a little bit back and forth on Jeremy. So, I mean, what does this mean? What does this mean for intra-Labour politics?
Well, there are a lot of things that are upside down after this last election. And in fact, to put this in perspective, that we're talking about the Scottish Conservative Party being relevant, and not only being relevant but carrying weight, is astonishing. Because the Scottish Conservatives were shut out of Scotland for a couple generations since the height of Thatcher, and in fact, they only came into this election with one MP in Scotland. Now, yeah, I'm a member of the Labour Party, and I worked in varying capacities on this election here in Plymouth. And I did vote for Jeremy Corbyn in the first leadership election, and gave a few talks at the university, wrote a blog post about it. And I did reassess my thinking on that. But even when I voted for Corbyn, I voted for Corbyn not out of any sense of ideological purity, but rather I voted for Corbyn because I thought he gave the party the best chance at actually winning an election. At the end of the day, that's all I care about is winning an election. What does this say about the future Corbynism? We all expected, going into this election, down 20 to 22 points in the polls, we were taking bets on just how badly wiped out we would get. It was an open question whether or not Jeremy Corbyn would stand down as leader, even if he lost 50 or 80, or some of the models suggested losing 100 MPs nationwide. And that's what we saw coming. And we did put that off because we were here to fight an election. We were here to try to win an election. And over the 7 weeks of the campaign, we did that, surrounded by all this uncertainty. And we decided we'd worry about the future of the Labour Party on the 9th of June. Well, realistically, the 10th or 11th after we sobered up.
Has that happened? Have you sobered up?
Yeah, I haven't. Strangely enough, it's weird. I haven't had a drink since late Friday or early Saturday morning. I kind of lost track there. It's a little sick. But what's weird about this is we're in a situation where Jeremy Corbyn lost the election. There's no way to finagle that, and I know some quarters of my party call this a brilliant victory. We didn't win. We still have far fewer seats than Conservatives. Even though we got 40% of the vote, they received 42.5% or something like that. So by any metric, we lost this election. But there is absolutely no call from any wing of the Labour Party for him to stand down. And so this is a weird situation where he won because he beat the hell out of expectations. And so he has definitely solidified his stronghold on the party for the time being.
Right. Now, so how long, the factional disputes that seem to be going on in the party, kind of make the ones that happen in the United States look pedestrian. But so, how long do you think this relative quiet will last? What's the next big event that's going to happen? I suppose Brexit is the next big event, right? But so, we're looking at how long can this coalition hold? Are we looking at 5 years until the next election, or what's the next thing that the Labour Party is going to be expected to do?
Well, the big thing happening in the future of the Labour Party is in October, we're having party conference. And there's an attempt by Jeremy Corbyn's allies to push through a fundamental rule change to lower the required nominations from the Parliamentary Labour Party, so members of Parliament, and while we still have them, members of the European Parliament who are Labour members, from 15% to 5%. So a scenario, should Jeremy Corbyn tomorrow resign, right now any open election for the Labour Party leadership would require 15% of the members of Parliament to nominate people for the ballot. At least as of mid-April, none of Jeremy Corbyn's allies would get that 15%. Now, the rule change that's being proposed to conference is to reduce that to 5%. And the idea is Jeremy Corbyn, even had we gotten crushed in this election, he was going to hang on until conference, hopefully pass that rule change, and then pass on the party to somebody of a similar ideological ilk. That's almost certainly not going to pass. And so the Labour Party is going to be in some sort of stasis. That said, given the 40% vote, I do believe a lot of people's minds will be opened up to Jeremy Corbyn's rather mainstream left-wing approach to governing. On to your main question.
Can we pause there, because there does seem to be some overstatement of I mean, the Labour. We're not talking about the platform of 1982 that Labour just ran on, right? I mean, Corbyn does have some views, especially maybe on foreign policy, that are sort of flatly outside the mainstream. But this is not, democratic socialism or something that we would understand in the U.S. terms. Or maybe it kind of is, because U.S. terms are just wrong. But, I mean, this was a fairly straightforward mainstream leftish platform that Labour ran on.
Yeah, it's not as radical as a lot of people make it out to be. It is radical when it's put up against, the Blair platforms.
Right.
He's talking about renationalizing the railways, renationalizing utilities, and a handful of other things. But he recognizes where the party is versus where his positions are. And Corbyn did change. And one of the things that I find flabbergasting is those that for lack of a better word, the cultists, those that have this cult of Corbyn. He's never changed his mind for 35, 40 years. He's got integrity, blah, blah, blah. If you look over the course of this campaign, he has changed his mind. He's changed his tune. And that's one of the reasons why he was successful. He was asked on Jeremy Paxman about abolishing the monarchy. Now, it's Jeremy Corbyn's, his personal view is to abolish the monarchy. And Paxman asked him on live television, why don't we see any of that in the manifesto? Where's that? And Jeremy Corbyn just looked at him and almost snickered, just said, well, obviously we're not going to do that. Right. And on Trident renewal, which is another big hot button issue in the Labour Party, especially here in Plymouth, home of the largest Navy base in Western Europe, he's gone from being the vice chair of the Committee for Nuclear Disarmament, which was a big movement here in the UK back in the 80s, to saying, well, okay, we'll renew it, to finally saying, okay, I can see using nuclear weapons, but I'm just not going to use them first. I mean, that's as far as he shifted. Okay, that's good. He's not going to use them first. I feel pleased about that.
That's fascinating, right? I mean, that's the one where he's moved to the right of me, right? I mean, and, I'm a big American national security guy who thinks that Trident is just a waste of money for the United Kingdom. So that's fascinating.
I think the same thing myself, actually, but I think, I hold that viewpoint on Trident for different reasons than a lot of the members of the Labour Party. They're pacifists. They don't think we should have nuclear weapons. They'd rather put all that money into fairies and rainbows and schools and health and such. And I'm probably going to
fairies, rainbows, schools, health, trains, all this make-believe things.
Get into a lot of trouble for that. Yeah. My attitude is we take that £120 billion and actually have a Royal Navy again.
Right, build aircraft carriers and destroyers instead of submarines that hide underwater.
I'd be happy with a few frigates at this point.
Right. All right, so where were you, when I interrupted you, so what were you going to say before I asked about sort of Jeremy Corbyn's radicalism or not quite radicalism, right? It was something about what comes after the conference.
Oh, yeah. What comes after that? I believe that there's going to be a reassessment within the Labour Party, especially the Parliamentary Labour Party. And these people that were chiefly concerned with the electability of these policies are going to recognize this can sell. Now, the reason that I backed off on Jeremy Corbyn, especially after the EU referendum campaign, was I was never convinced, and I've said this to my friends in the party here, on various wings of the party, I've never been convinced it's his message that was problematic. It was clearly the messenger. As a leader of the opposition and the front bench that he had before this campaign, they didn't seem to know what they were doing at all. I think the message is still sound. I think having what I would consider to be a fairly mainstream left-wing manifesto, nationalize a few things, do other things in the right ways, put money back in the health service. I think that can sell. And he also sells hope rather than despair, and that seems to be working. I think members of the Parliamentary Labour Party are going to come around to that. And so even though Jeremy Corbyn is 67 or 68 years old, he's not in this for the long haul. There might be a chance for somebody of that ideological wing of the party to actually make it on a leadership election ballot, following Jeremy Corbyn's standing down eventually at some point.
All right, so next thing, so the entire intent of this election, or at least the point from that May talked about, the explicit reason to do this was to strengthen her negotiating position with regards to Brexit. It is fair to say that this is not an outcome of this election, right? That the hand is actually weakened, especially because DUP, sort of the Scottish Tories and DUP both have sort of non-mainstream views on Brexit.
It's definitely weakened. The European Union, well, the 27 other countries in the European Union are dealing with a minority government. I mean, the EU always had the upper hand in these negotiations. They get to set the rules for access to the EU market. And this is something the British don't necessarily understand. At least they don't understand it publicly. The debate here on this little island is, okay, this is what we want. This is how we're going to get it. And we don't want these other things. The problem is, if you want access to the single market, you've got to allow for free movement. That's a red line. You just can't cross that. You know, a lot of people here think that that's how it's going to play out. Now we're looking at a significantly weakened prime minister, both within her own party, within the country, and internationally. Trying to ask for all these things without having to make any compromises. She's not going to be able to do it. And that is going to be fascinating and also quite frustrating to watch. And these negotiations have to kick off, I believe, in a week or 2 weeks or something like that. So she did not get what she was expecting by any stretch of the imagination.
Right. And also, just sort of internationally for a second, you know, the cancellation of Trump's state visit, which, you know, I mean, she has to be sort of relieved by that, right? Or I don't know if she was counting on Trump to give her a boost, right? But that has to be, I would imagine that's a bit of a relief for not having to deal with angry throngs of protesters all around London and having Trump there.
It's certainly going to give her one less thing to worry about. Now, the thing is she quickly cozied up with Donald Trump, and she got a lot of criticism here about it. But it'll give her one less distraction, one less thing to worry about. However, considering that the UKIP vote went by any estimate between easily 50 to 60% to the Conservatives, and Nigel Farage is such a friend with Trump that he's what is the exact status of him with the FBI investigation?
I don't know. Look, everybody's under investigation, right? I mean, everybody in the United States is under investigation now for ties with Russia. So
you shouldn't mention that in public.
Well, no. Look, if some of us had mentioned these things in public beforehand, then we wouldn't be under investigation. So.
Sure.
Now, to widen our lens just a little bit, and I know that you've been busy, but sort of ideologically and in terms of outsiderness, and you know, people are trying to evaluate this election in the UK along a whole, you know, many different ranges, right? And sort of on that, sort of what appears in France to have been over the weekend a colossal victory of neoliberalism. You know, is there any utility in even trying to connect dots right now in what we conceive of as the Western world, in the way that some people are wanting to try to connect them right now, or is everything basically just happening on a nation-to-nation basis?
So
that sort of defies.
What I think you're getting at is, does Jeremy Corbyn's magnificent non-victory suggest that Bernie Sanders would have won it all?
You know, I didn't want to say it in those terms, but
I just did, and I think it's a ridiculous proposition. The political cultures, and that's a word I typically don't like using, mind, because I'm an empiricist. I like things that I can measure. You can't measure political culture. That said, I'm going to go ahead and steam on anyway. The political cultures are significantly different. The electoral institutions, the institutional arrangements are significantly different. And I get frustrated here with all the media work I do in the UK, trying to tamp down the suggestion that Donald Trump won, therefore the United States is X, Y, or Z. He lost by 3 million votes. Would Bernie Sanders have done? Is Jeremy Corbyn a suggestion that Bernie Sanders would have done better? Jeremy Corbyn only got 40% of the vote. So if you want to make that comparison, feel free to make it all you want. That just means that Bernie would have gotten 40% as opposed to 48 odd. So no, I don't really think there are many pan-democratic waves in electoral politics that we can actually point to and say that's happening. Now, the one that we can is kind of a right-wing populism that has sprung up all across Europe. But again, by and large, there are two forces, one endogenous, one exogenous, that are affecting that. And one is the European Union. The other, has been the ongoing refugee crisis. So there are similarities here. And the United Kingdom, UKIP got what it wanted.
Right.
They wanted to carry on, but their entire raison d'etre was the EU referendum. It passed. We might be getting out of the European Union, and so UKIP doesn't really have a reason to exist anymore.
Right. So even to the extent, I mean, and see if you agree with my recharacterization. Even to the extent we can identify these sort of pan-Western democratic waves, they are mediated by domestic cultures and domestic institutions such that they lead to widely different outcomes, right? And so in the UK, the larger Conservative Party essentially co-ops the movement. In France, it is completely crushed. In the United States, it wins, right? So, everything, these idiosyncratic institutional factors sort of change even what we think of as a wave to, vastly different outcomes.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, let's put it on just blunt ideological terms. David Cameron, when he was Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, was in a lot of ways, as a conservative, as a member of the Conservative Party, the Tories, was in a lot of policy positions, some out of necessity, some out of genuine sincerity, to the left of Barack Obama. So trying to draw a comparison between Bernie Sanders and Jeremy Corbyn, I think it's too simplistic and lazy, almost.
All right. Well, David, thank you for joining us, and Foreign Entanglements viewers, thank you for joining us. We'll be delighted to have you again, and Dave, we'll be delighted to have you again the next time there's an election in some part of your world. What would that be? Some sort of Irish by-election at some point in 2018 or something? I have no idea how these things work.
Well, there might be, there very well might be another general election in the United Kingdom in October and November. So.
Well, that would be exciting.
I think that would be just so awesome. I can't even begin to tell you.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
All right. Thanks, Rob. Take care.